So before I kick off, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Yurraga and Turrbal people as the traditional landowners and First Nations people of the land on which I speak from today. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present and emerging communities, stakeholders. I also extend my respect to all First Nations people who may be on the call today. So a little bit of background for those. I assume you all know Domm and obviously have heard a little bit about his career journey and experience as an entrepreneur, but a bit of an overview of exactly what Domm's been doing lately and his previous experience. So he's the co-founder and CEO of Fast, the world's fastest online login and checkout platform, widely known as the world's fastest CEO, which I can't wait to talk about. Domm is an entrepreneur, a self-taught engineer. Domm has founded and scaled companies in the logistics, transportation, and technology sectors. He previously founded and served as CEO of Tow, an on-demand vehicle towing platform in Australia that processed more than $50 million worth of transactions. During his tenure from there, Domm was awarded in top spot of Deloitte's Tech Fast 50 and recognised as Brisbane Young Entrepreneur of the Year. Domm has worked across Australia and the US, working in national and multinational telecommunications and technology companies, including Dell, with deep cross-functional experience. Domm's background provides him with a unique perspective that spans R&D, sales, and operations, all of which contributed to his vision for Fast. So thank you so much, Domm, for joining us. Appreciate your time and giving back to the Queensland community here. How is everything going?
Very good, very busy, but very good. Yeah, no, it's a going from strength to strength. It's been a fun ride so far. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that ride. So before Fast, what has been your journey into entrepreneurship?
Mm-hmm. I think you know, I started my first e-commerce business when I was 15, and this was, and I'm not a spring chicken, so it was a long time ago. That was 19 years ago now. So it you know, that was long before there was, you know, Shopify and you could easily create a store. And that was while I was at boarding school to sort of have money to spend on weekends and stuff. So I've kind of always been dabbling. You know, I started programming when I was about 14 and building computers and basically anything to do with computers I always liked. And so it was always quite technical, but at the same time, I quite liked not only building things, but selling things. I just liked the process of it. I didn't really think of it as like being entrepreneurial, more just, it really enjoyed everything about being able to sort of conduct commerce digitally, you know, and build things that other people could use. I still remember writing my first like Visual Basic program and just being able to put a button on the screen that other people could click and thinking that was incredible. And so, yeah, I've just always sort of been captivated by computers and still am. And then but you know, when I finished school, I went into the workforce and just did lots of things. I learned how to sell and have done every type of sales that there is, from door-to-door sales right up to enterprise selling. And I've worked in sort of fraud and security roles and product roles, and you know, I really just wanted to get like a lot of experience. I'm sort of naturally inquisitive and like knowing how things work and teams interact and so forth. And I think all of those things and like years and years of just, you know, being inquisitive sort of all added up to being in a good position to kind of found a company and find interesting problems that I wanted to solve. And yeah, in 2009, I quit my job at Dell. I was an enterprise sales rep at Dell out of Sydney and looking after New Zealand for Dell in the enterprise space. And I came over to Silicon Valley for 3 months and just, you know, I wanted to build a tech media network that didn't sort of work out. And I didn't really enjoy it here, to be honest, at the time. And I came back to Australia and I met my now wife and moved up to Brisbane. And then I just sort of started building tech companies, and not necessarily startups, but digital agencies or companies that would build sort of tech platforms or sell them, and did a lot of work with the automotive industry, and then ended up working with a big car auction and building a big software platform for them. And then we sort of, the two owners of that car auction and I got in, co-founded or Tow.com.au in 2014. Ran that for 4 years. Ended up shutting that down in June 2018. And then, a few months later, I sort of came across the sort of concept of Fast, and the rest is history.
So given you've got such a long time dabbling in your own business, what was the kind of catalyst for that? Like, have you come from an entrepreneurial family, small business owners? Like, where's that come from?
No, so my dad was a director and actor, and mum did a little bit of modeling, but it was mainly a sort of, for most of my life, mum was raised us kids. Again, there was 4 of us kids growing up, and now I've got a fifth. There's a 5th one of our kids now. Mum. So my dad was an actor and director, and a struggling actor and director, his whole life, sort of in between gigs always, and had lots and lots of ups and downs. And I never really wanted to live that freelance life. As a kid, I remember we all of us kids would do a lot of acting and commercials ourselves and stuff like that. And I just remember thinking, I just don't want to go into this career and have those ups and downs. So instead, I became an entrepreneur and had the ups and downs there. So it's kind of funny, but I didn't pick it. I think that this just sort of picked me. I think my sort of personality doesn't, lends itself to doing my own thing always. And I think being a founder means that I get to take the reins and decide how to do things. And like I said, I've always just been incredibly inquisitive since I was a little kid. I remember my Orpa, who's now passed, used to call me the young professor, because I just used to watch how things worked when I was 3 or 4 years old. And I would take TVs apart on the side of the road, and I was just always interested. So I think just that sort of inquisitive nature is what led me to kind of being a founder.
You've got a pretty quite a lot of experience across an enterprise. Would you call yourself in any way a specialist of any of those, or would you be more of a master of all, as in a generalist? Or is it just because of your problem solving, maybe nature or curiosity, that's just pulled you into those different directions rather than trying to be a generalist or a specialist?
Yeah, I would say I'm more of a generalist. I've often said I sit at this sort of intersection of commercialization, like engineering and product, and it's still 3 fairly large areas, but I really do like to be very involved in all 3 parts of that. My co-founder in Fast and our COO Alison, she will be able to attest, the operational perspective, part is far less interesting to me. Anything that involves paperwork or sort of less interesting tasks, I just can't sort of handle. But product, everything sort of on the growth side of the business, I really quite enjoy. And I think through my history, through my career, I've worked in lots of different industries, and I think that's whilst the industries may be very different, like my approach to solving problems is the same in each business. The type of breaking problems down, whatever problem an industry have, whatever the opportunity is. I find like that the process I go through is kind of the same each time. I often said, like, I would happily work in a business, that sold curtain rods if I found an interesting enough problem. So I don't really mind about the industry so much, more as how big the scale of the opportunity and the problem is. And
So moving into Fast, I would imagine you're quite a visionary, thinking through that. Actually, personally, me as a person who does online shopping, it's definitely obviously a pain point I've experienced myself. So I just give up. So what was the trigger, or what kicked off Fast?
Yeah. So I'm married with 2 little kids, and my youngest son, Coda, he was in hospital at the time, for 3 weeks, and my wife and I were taking turns someone at the hospital 24 hours a day with him. And we had my wife's grandmother at our house staying with us, and she was sitting at the kitchen table next to me one night, and she was ordering groceries on Coles website, forgot a password and just couldn't order groceries. And I just remember thinking it was just like preposterous that this little old lady was sitting at the kitchen table, purse out, ID, license, credit card, and just one of the biggest companies in Australia wouldn't take a couple $100 from her. And I just remember thinking that like the state of the internet, the state of authentication, the state of payments and checkout was just like fundamentally broken. It didn't make sense that this is the way it worked. That someone who was perfectly able to identify herself and pay just couldn't. And so I just, again, I like solving problems. I like just kind of working on interesting things. And so I didn't like set out to build a company. I just built a prototype of a passwordless authentication system over a couple of days. And I put it online on a site called Producthunt, and had like tens of thousands of people use it in a couple of days, and realized that, my hypothesis was one shared by many other people. And I didn't even dive in and build a business, straight away. I just, at the time that was called Bypass. And I just sort of toyed with the idea for a few months, and sort of developed concept and spoke to people and spoke to companies and tried to get a better read. And then a few months later, I founded Fast.
Pretty amazing. So that process that you just described of, you saw the problem, you basically just went and built something, to prototype it or test and validate it. What was the timeline to do that and to actually get, a few thousand customers on?
48 hours. About 48
What?
hours.
And how did you promote that? What did you do?
Producthunt, producthunt.com. It's an incredible tool. It is a completely free website that, you can go and put your product up once. And, when you launch a new venture and you put it up, and a lot of people, visit that site daily to see all the new things that have launched that day, and you compete with them. And if lots of people like it and it gets ranked highly, then you go to the front of the page, and this is a site that gets lots and lots of traffic. And
this is Producthunt, right? Producthunt.com.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Do you want to just put that in chat, Rachel? That'd be great. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So you didn't really have to do much. You put it on producthunt.com, and then it just went from there. And then you made the front page.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I sort of realized, right, is that in my head, it was absolutely clear, it just doesn't make sense the way that the internet has scaled in a way that wasn't necessarily anticipated when the internet was built, right? And passwords are completely fine if we've got one password, but the password was invented in 1960 and hasn't changed. And I don't think that when they, it was invented at MIT to protect the MIT mainframe so that only some people could access it. And I don't think at the time they were thinking that we were going to all have 500 services that we used, on a daily basis, and passwords to remember. And that's, the state of the internet, and it grows by 80% or something year on year. And so, we're just, authentication hasn't scaled. It doesn't make sense. We have to continually log in to each site individually when you're on the same machine or on the same device. And then the same thing is true of checkout and forms. I'm 34 years old. I've been using the internet for a long time. Why do I have to keep typing my name in, right, to every form that I access? And I think Google Forms is a great free service that anyone can go and create a form, but it's run by a company that probably arguably has more personal data on more people than anyone else in the world. And yet we still have to type our name into that form. It just doesn't make sense that this is the state of the internet. And so, my hypothesis was that, remove passwords, we'll send a link, let people log in once, and then once they've logged in, any other site that uses the same login system can give one-click login to people when they're already authenticated. And yeah, I think that really resonated with people, and people, were always like, of course, it's a no-brainer. Why is this not the way that the internet works? And so Fast now is the evolution of that core concept. We do the same thing for checkout, right? Checkout once using Fast Checkout. Every other site on the internet, you get one-click checkout. It makes complete sense. And so I think, that sort of core vision resonates with everyone who uses the internet. And went from there.
What proportion of time in those early days did you spend on understanding whether the problem was already solved elsewhere and people just really didn't know about it, or were there any competitors, or whether it was something worth pursuing? Obviously not long, because you went and tested it in 48 hours and got some traction straight away. But what kind of effort did you put into that, or where do you think that you spent your time proportionate in the first 6 months? Like, what was your time investment made off?
Yeah. So, we always say that most of our competitors are worth at least $1 trillion. We've got companies like Apple and Google and whatever that sort of operate in this space. But the reality is it was like, it's not a niche area, right? Like, and, every consumer on the internet knows that this is not a solved problem. And everyone here has probably had a problem with a password in the last week, and has had to fill in a form online probably today. And this is something we do all the time. And so it was like abhorrently clear that this was just a big broken part of the internet, and it really doesn't take any understanding that that's the case, because we all have this problem all the time. And I think that, like, whether or not there are other solutions in the market, like, or whether or not there are competitors in the market, right, doesn't actually mean there could be a company that has literally got the perfect solution to the problem, but they may have the worst go-to-market strategy in the world. And so then that problem is always going to stay broken, right? And so, whether there is, whether it's a solved problem is not just about whether the product exists, and there isn't, another sort of carbon copy of Fast out there. But again, even if there was, is if they're not growing, if they're not being adopted, maybe the commercial model is wrong, business model is wrong. And so, we do a lot of sort of competitor analysis, still in the business today, right across the landscape that we operate in. But whether it was the first 6 months or up till now, I think we spend fairly small amount of time in really like researching or sort of deciding whether or not to go down a path. But again, the area that we operate in is pretty open space. Like, it's not like, if you're in a much smaller niche that maybe you don't know well, then perhaps you would do more research. But again, like, you could ask any consumer on the street the last time they had to enter a password or fill in a form, and if it was,
obvious.
Yeah.
For the early stage founders on the call, who don't have product market fit yet, or don't believe they do, what kind of key insights or tips can you give them on where to focus their energy on, and what's really that magical thing that helps you get it, and how do you know you've got it?
Yeah, just testing and iteration. I think it's a hard thing, because you need to both listen to your customers, yet also ignore them at the same time. Because a lot of the time they don't know. Well, you need to listen to their problems and you need to ignore their solutions, to be honest. Your customers typically don't know how to solve, like, most of their own problems, but they know what their problems are. And some of the times they're actually not even good at articulating their problems. They will tell you them, but they won't tell you directly what their problems are. I found that, that's very much true in our business. Obviously the number one thing you've got to do is be speaking to them, and to be able to understand that. And that's probably the most key part. If you're out talking to your customers a lot, then you naturally get really good at understanding what their problems are. But yeah, I spend very little time typically, like, taking their proposed solutions verbatim, because again, if you solve, they'll typically give you like a very personalized solution that may suit a much smaller niche than you really want to serve, and then not fit other people very well. Yeah,
that's some good tips. So at what point did you start to experience revenue? How many months in?
Well, so officially the company was launched in March 2019. So I incorporated the company on March 14, 2019, Pi Day, and from Brisbane. And we launched our first commercial product in September 2020. So, not quite 18 months later. Yeah.
Awesome. And you recently were in the news this year, capital raising. You also capital raised last year, I think it was in June, 30 million and then 102 US million in January. What was that journey like? Obviously you did that in the States. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and that journey, and also why you did that in the States and not in Australia?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know that there's a fund in Australia that would write us $100 million check. So we would have to stitch together a lot of smaller checks to get there. But look, our Series A last year was a $20 million Series A, and this round was $102 million Series B. And so we announced our Series A in March last year, and we announced our Series B in February this year, and it's about a year apart. And the two rounds were very different. Our Series A we closed during COVID, but most of the round we had done in person, so we met with a lot of people. Our Series B this year was entirely virtual, right? So we didn't have a single in-person meeting in raising our Series B, and so very different from that perspective. But at the same time, if you just switch in-person meetings for Zoom, at the end of the day, it was quite similar. I would say we fundraise a little bit differently, especially for now coming into a not quite late stage company. We're still only 2 years old, but a sort of later stage from a capital raising perspective business than other companies, in that we still now will take lots and lots of meetings every single time. I can tell you we have, I can't tell you how many people literally beg to invest in Fast still today. We get cold emails from investors offering huge amounts of money all the time. It's very unusual. It's a lot different to raising money in Australia and being a sort of company, trying to prove product market fit and raise a seed fund or a seed round. It's an entirely different thing and very strange, and we're both humbled and bemused by it. But I think that the number one thing is that despite how many people want to invest, despite how many people how we can raise money somewhat easily, is we still meet with a lot of people. We probably met with 70, 80 people to do our Series B. Even though our lead, Stripe, who led our Series B this year, also led our Series A last year. And so despite that, we still meet with a lot of people, and we do that, to make sure we get the right terms, to make sure we do have the right investors, and get the right valuation, and it's really important. And so for people who are fundraising, I absolutely don't be afraid of meeting with a lot of people. And if it's taking a lot of people to a lot of meetings to meet to find people who are willing to invest in the company, that's fine too. It's fine to get a lot of no's. And and at first we didn't have lots and lots of investors dying to invest in the company. We had to build that over time. But but despite having that now, still doing the hard work is definitely a good move. Yeah.
What was that hard work made up of? So let's say for your Series A, what was the lead up into that?
So our Series A, we did over a longer time than our Series B. So we probably started unofficially in November 2020, and we met with a lot of people over 2 months. Over November and December, we probably met with like 70 to 100 different investors, and in multiple cities. And there was a lot of interest, and but we made sure that we really wanted to meet with a lot of different people. And we actually got the offer for our round on New Year's Eve of 2020, and I was at a little Mexican taqueria here in San Francisco, and got our offer, and then spent 2 months negotiating the deal. So it was actually quite a long drawn out negotiation. In the end, it was a really long time that we spent negotiating that deal. And it was because it was with a strategic investor, and there were some sort of partnership terms or non-financial terms that that were being included in the deal, and I wanted to make sure that we got that right, and so we took the time to do that and not rush the financing, and it was a really good move. But then our Series B this year, whole thing was probably done over 6 weeks, start to finish, from meeting people and negotiating the deal and so forth. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty long, considering. That's pretty quick, considering for both, compared to a lot of the founders that I've seen going through their journey in Australia. You know, one founder was very prepared. In fact, previously a CFO still took about 6 months on road shows and things like that just to even get small checks, as you kind of highlighted here in Australia, which is very, very true. We talk about it a lot. In fact, seed funding is really drying up and becoming more towards a Series A these days anyway. We're moving in that direction with more follow-ons rather than taking a punt on early stage companies. What's your thoughts or views on that, and what could, I guess, this ecosystem benefit or learn from in comparison to the US ecosystem when it comes to raising?
So I still think it's not like suddenly really easy to raise money being in the States. There is a lot of capital here. There's also just a lot of companies here, and a lot of companies fighting for that capital. And I do once a month, I do a Twitter thread for founders raising capital, so that they can reply with a one-line pitch for their business, their name of the company, URL, and every single time I get anywhere from like 200 to 500 companies reply to the Twitter thread promoting the company, and a lot of investors obviously go through those threads, and a lot of people have raised. Typically every time I do it, and I put this in the thread, that hundreds of startups will reply. Thousands of VCs will contact the startups, and like a lot of them message me after, and they've raised millions of dollars pretty much every time I post one of these threads. And but it gives you an idea, like both the amount of volume there is, but also the amount of companies, and that's just one Twitter thread. It's an interesting thing. The difference of Australia, apart from the amount of capital, I think, is that Australia doesn't have, a huge list of massive exits and outcomes, right? That the US has. And so whilst our VC sector is maturing, it's so immature compared to the US, right? And they haven't had these outsized returns that they can sort of justify taking the same bets that US investors have. And it's a different style of investing, I think, where it's, Australia is quite a conservative nation generally in venture capital. I think it definitely is. I think, I've said this a few times, I think that because they haven't seen these outsized returns, the way that I pitch the business in Australia and the US is very different, maybe not so much these days, but early on it was, where in Australia, you almost want to tone down your pitch, because people will just think you're nuts if you tell them what you're planning or wanting to do. Here, they love it. If I tell people I'm going to go change the world, they want to back me to do it. It's amazing. And in Australia, they just plainly don't believe it. I had lots and lots of VCs in Australia who would say, how would you build this business very early on? I'd be like, well, I tell them what I want to do, and they'd say, but you would have to sign up every business, and every business would have to integrate your tech for that to happen. I'm like, yes, that's 100%. That's the plan. They'd be like, well, that would be really hard. I'm like, of course, but that's the whole point. And this is why we're raising venture capital to go and do that. And Australians just couldn't grasp that concept, that it was this big long-term play, and that you were building a large network, and that it would be hard work. And I think they really want to see these later stage kind of proven models with really reliable growth. And that is just very different. Americans, really want to see how could this become a $1 billion business? And if in Australia, if you told the VCs it was going to be a $1 billion business, I think they'd probably think that you were strange half the time. And part of that is that our market just can't support a lot of big companies. And so I think there's a lot of things at play, but I also think that means that because our venture capital sector is like that, I think we do have a lot in Australia, a larger number of companies that are less ambitious and that are taking safer options and that are building less ambitious products or serving less ambitious markets and going for more reliable kind of growth, which is a safer investment. And so I think that's fueling the problem where we've got investors who want to make safer bets. We've got founders building safer companies, and the exits just aren't getting bigger and bigger because these two things are sort of compounding. So yeah.
Thank you. You said that in a very eloquent way. I couldn't agree with you more. So what kind of tips can you give to the founders who are on the call, who are capital raising and are struggling? Mm-hmm. They're in the Australian ecosystem. What sort of advice can you relay to them?
So you've got to find a way to be interesting. You've got to showcase your I always say the way that you're pitching is the things that an investor needs to believe is that the problem that you're solving is a real problem. And that's the number one. The first thing that you need to do is make them believe that the problem is a real problem. The second thing you need to make them believe is that your proposed solution could at least theoretically work. No one knows if these if startups or companies or products are going to work, but it needs to at least make sense that would be a solution that would and could work. The third is that if your solution was successful, that the market, the size of that problem, the scale of that problem, the number of people who have that problem, the number of companies that have that problem is so big that the payoff is going to be really big, right? So the company is going to be worth a lot of money, that the market is huge, that it means that there's the return on their investment would be really large. And then the fourth thing that you've got to prove is that you are capable of doing all of that. So they can believe that all of those first three things are true, and then just not believe that you're the person that can carry that out. And so you need to get them to believe all those four things. And I find that if they believe all those four things, then they will typically want to write you a check. And so you've got two issues. The first one is getting people interested enough to talk to you in the first place. And then the second thing is getting them to believe all of those things when you're talking to them. And so that's your main job, fundraising. The thing that I like to do, the added little kicker, is the reason you meet with a lot of people, or something that happens when you meet with a lot of people in a short amount of time. If you can get most of those people to agree to believe most of those four things, then you build a network effect amongst investors where they start talking to each other about you. And when they all realize that they're all excited about the same company at the same time, then that's when bidding wars start. And you can really see this inflection point during a fundraising process when that network effect kicks in.
Of that strategy. So in regards to how concrete or how firm you are with that sort of conviction and confidence in your, let's say, your data room when you were originally raising, how accurate was that, or how close is that to still where you're going right now? Like, was that, how much effort I'm trying to gauge how important the data room is compared to obviously what plays out during in regards to a VC and their view on it?
In the sort of pre-seed seed stage, and I think someone put it, a question here about raising money at that sort of stage too. Like, very little, to be honest, for a good, experienced venture capitalist. Like, everything is like a highly ambitious, highly ambiguous guess at that stage. And to be honest, almost every startup, whether or not they pivot, but their product strategy changes, their customer strategy, go-to-market strategy is informed at that stage. So I would say put very little time into projections or, whatever. If you've got a deck that says that you're going to be, producing $10 million of revenue in 2 years' time, then I can tell you that just shouldn't be in there. Is no seed stage company really can go from today having $0 of revenue and accurately predicting how much, how many millions of dollars of revenue they're going to have in 2 years, or tens of millions of dollars of revenue they're going to have in 2 years. And frankly, you don't need like I said, any decent, mature sort of venture capitalist these days understands that at seed stage. What they want to see is that, like, the sort of 4 things I outlined before, that's what they want to see. What's the problem? What's the solution? Who's, how big's the market? And who are the people behind it? And if they have conviction, they're going to want to see you go out and try and solve that problem. And everything else, they're happy being kind of open-ended.
Great. So Johnny did post that question on the chat there, and I have also received a few private questions, so we might just jump straight into Q&A, but I do have some questions on your scaling as well. So we'll cover some of these early stage ones to start off with. So Johnny's question specifically also was about the pre-seed. How did you raise such a large pre-seed in Australia when it was really only you working on it? Is it because you were technical?
Yeah, so I actually raised a angel round in Australia in May 2019. I raised 600,000 Aussie dollars, so about 400,000 American. And I caught the next flight to the US after that, once I had raised that money. And that was all for private angels, right? So no venture capitalists. It was just private Australian angels, high net worths that invested in the $600,000 round. And that was hard work. I mean, that probably took longer than every other round of fundraising sets, right? That's what I mean, that you've got to, that was still met with lots and lots of people. Again, probably met with 70, 80 people to do that. It took time. You've got to build all the conviction from zero history in the company, right? And these are Australian, again, conservative Australian investors who you really have to, kind of get over the line that this could be a big business. And again, even in those angels, I think not one of them probably thought that we could get to, the thought of this sort of company getting to $1 billion or anything even remotely similar wouldn't have crossed their minds. They just, thought that understood the problem that passwords are like broken and horrible, and it makes sense that there could be tech that would fix all of that for every internet user. I raised a $2.5 million pre-seed round in September 2019. So I got to the US in June 2019. I spent a few months here, not raising capital. I was just here building networks, working on the product, getting businesses using fast login. And then in September, I was introduced to a fintech investor called Jan Hammer. He actually is based in London. The fund does have an office here, but he's based in London. And he came to the US one week, and we had breakfast one morning. And to be honest, he actually gave me an offer on the spot in our first meeting. Hadn't even seen a deck. So this is my point about spending too much time on working on projections in a deck. It wasn't that he needed those 4 things that I gave him in a meeting. It was a good, strong referral introduction that I got into him. But he believed those 4 things straight away. He knew the market, understood the problem, realized the scale of it, and offered to lead our round on the spot. And they led a $2.5 million pre-seed. And to be honest, up until the night before we received our term sheet, so he made me an offer to lead our round on the spot. We didn't talk terms. I can't think of how long, maybe a few weeks later, or a couple of weeks later, we were, the night before we got a term sheet, they told me that they were going to give me a term sheet for a $1.5 million pre-seed round. And I said to them, I'd rather build a stronger team. So can you give me $2.5 million at the same dilution amount? And they did. And the reality was, and it was true, the reason we wanted the money so we could build the strongest team possible. And I've spent the last 2 years building strongest possible team that we could here, and so it's been a great move. But so fundraising can be hard, it can be slow, it can also be fast. You've just got to make that right connection with the right people.
That's great insight. So I'll go to a few more questions. We have a question on COVID. I'm going to summarize this one with another question. So we've got a startup who's working in the tourism space. They did ask about how to construct a pitch, but I'll just say that we're going to share the recording on our YouTube later. I think Dom's kind of explained how to structure your pitch and what you need to demonstrate in there earlier. But in regards to COVID and then going into tourism, for someone who wants to capital raise, do you think COVID has had an impact? And for an industry founder like in the tourism space, what sort of things do you think is for consideration with investors at the moment?
Yeah, so and bearing in mind, the US is in a very different place than Australia as well in terms of COVID. And I think tourism here is still dead, right? It's still completely empty. To be honest, I would hate to be raising money for a tourism business right now, just to be frank. I think it's probably still different in Australia, and I think even here we're starting to come through, but how the US and the rest of the world opens up, how fast that happens is still very much unknown. And startups are hard, investments are unknown in general. Adding in the unknowns of the real unknowns of COVID and travel and whatnot is hard. And so the unfortunate truth there is it's going to be really difficult to raise money for tourism and travel technology. I'm not saying impossible, but it is going to be really difficult. And to justify good, there's just going to be a lot of people who won't touch it, and the people who will, are going to be more cautious. So, yeah, I think it's one of the hardest sectors to be raising money for right now. Yeah.
Thank you. And also, everyone remember, I guess, if timing makes a difference for anything, including what you're leading to, is timing may not be right.
Yeah, the best thing, absolutely, revenue. I would be looking for revenue right now in that sector, right? And bearing in mind that you've kind of got two market forces. The first one is investors going, we got no idea what's going to happen. Maybe we just don't touch this for a while. And then the other market force of a tourism and travel sector dying for money and wanting the world to open up. And so you've kind of got a very captive customer base at the same time as a very non-captive investor base. And so, customers are going to be looking for anything that could potentially move the needle for them. So it's probably a great time to be trying to grow through revenue. I'm not saying that it's not a sector that's going to be flush with cash, but it is a sector that's going to be looking for solutions to help. And so I would, personally be spending more of my time on customers at the moment than investors in that sector.
Thank you. So another question, this one's from Jaden. If you were to launch, would you advise, or how would you advise trying to seek investment or launch into the US at this point, given the travel restrictions for an Australian company?
Yeah, so COVID's probably the best thing in the world for Australians in wanting to raise outside capital. It's probably no better time. It is in the last 12 months, I haven't had a single in-person meeting, right? We did our Series B without a single in-person meeting. And for people on the call, you can tell I've still got a very Australian accent. I don't sound like an American here. And so you can absolutely raise money virtually and remote and don't have to be physically based here. There's now more companies than ever that just will not have a headquarters ever, again. So I think it's a great thing for Australian founders I think American investors are now eyes wide open to investing, far more broadly and abroad than they ever have before, which is the great thing. I still think that as much as that is true, Americans still just don't necessarily know, you're still on the other side of the world. There's still risks for them. You need to de-risk the business as much as you can for them and prove to them that your team is world-class and the team to do it and win. And I think it's, there's just de-risking that you need to do. And I knew here that when I first got here in June 2019 that I could book meetings with lots of people on the basis that I was an Australian founder in the US. because it's different, it's interesting. I'm not just another founder here from Stanford. Is just like there's something somewhat unique. But the second I'm in the meeting, I knew that I had to de-risk myself, and that was why I was physically based here. Right? Is that they could sit in front of me, they could see me, they knew I was here, and I still think that there's a comfort level in the back of their minds knowing that I'm still in San Francisco, despite the fact I haven't had a single in-person meeting. They know that I'm physically based here, and people with money like to know that their money is kind of geographically close to them. I found so. I still think that there's a barrier that you've kind of got to get across, but I do think that more US venture dollars are going to flow internationally over the next 12 months than probably ever before. So yeah.
Great. So we've got a few questions on your scaling of your team. So you've scaled in a world-class team in 2.5 years, but you also, I looked through last night, all the roles that you've got advertised. So for anyone who's listening and is looking for a career step change and you are considered an amazing human, please go and check it out on the website, on Domm's website. And then in the scaling of those teams, how did you find those people? Like what were the key things you did to find that amazing team?
Yeah, so we went from 2 people in November 2019 to we're now 133 odd people. I think I checked last time I saw. So we've grown the team really quickly. We were 10 people at the start of last year. So in just over a year, we've grown from like 10 to 130 really quickly. It takes a lot of work. I mean, the same thing, this is, you'll see it's kind of a pattern for me is, it's just hard work, right? You just meet with lots of people. I think we interviewed 100 engineers before we hired our first one. We put job ads on every single network we could. I still do 50 to 70 outreaches on LinkedIn a day, probably 5 or 6 days a week. On top of, we have 7 recruiters that work in the company. Most of our team does outreach as well. It's really hard work. Like everything about startups is hard work, and it's meant to be, right? It's just not easy, and it shouldn't be. Whether you're fundraising, recruiting, selling, it's just hard work. And I think there's no like real silver bullets or tricks or whatever. It's just doing the hard work. The one thing that we did that was really unique that was great was we hired a videographer. The 4th employee in the company was a videographer, and I wanted to, every single employee that came on, we would film a video about that employee and then share that and use that to hire the next person. And it worked really well. These are amazing videos, and I hadn't seen another company do that, even a much bigger company. And we got known for it. The videos sort of, went viral and people really liked them, and we would do more and more of it. And now the videographer would, create content for lots of things, but it really worked for recruiting. And really, we've been good at leveraging our network. So for every customer we get, we use their testimonials and case studies to get another customer. For every employee we get, we use them to help recruit more employees. For every investor we get them to introduce us to more investors. And so, it's definitely a good multiplier effect.
That's amazing. I have watched some of those videos and they're pretty cool. One thing I recommend to everyone, there are a few questions that are asking similar things. I recommend you check out and follow Domm and the Fast team and actually look at who they've recruited, who their top first hires were. That's all available. That's all online, whether you're looking on LinkedIn or the website or on Twitter and social channels. But there is one specific question here from Tim Hill, RCL Scale Up. Domm, can you talk to us about the process on how you hired Matthew Kobach?
So Matt actually reached out to me on Twitter towards the end of 2019. In fact, I think there was only 4 of us at the time when Matt Kobach reached out to us. And I think, honestly, it was probably the employee videos that he saw and the sort of stuff that we were posting. And he thought it was interesting. He was running social media for the New York Stock Exchange and content. And he reached out. And to be honest, I said it just wasn't the right time for us. We were too small. It didn't make sense for us to hire someone in charge of social media. I wanted to concentrate on building the product and whatever. And we sort of stayed in touch. And over the next 12 months or so, we would ping each other occasionally, and I would sort of ask his thoughts on different platforms and whatever. And then, in 2020, I thought it's time that we need. No one was, I was basically still managing the Fast channels and I just didn't have time and wasn't putting the energy into it. And I wanted someone to manage them directly. And Matt, was doing a phenomenal job at, and he's a phenomenal sort of content and social thinker. And so I reached back out to him and I said, let's chat again. And we chatted on a weekend, and I got an offer to him. And I don't know, a week later he accepted and came on board. And so it was a nice. It was social media that connected us.
I love that. So I can't recommend enough guys to go and check out what is going on the socials. You are so active and transparent with what you're doing. It's like you're building your brand, your business, and your credibility all in front of us like a stage. And I think that is so helpful for other companies who are trying to work out how to get there. So please go and check that out. I want to talk to you about imposter syndrome, and also maybe get your views on any challenges with people who have come from a diverse background, whether it be gender, race, and do you see the same challenges or any tips for them when they're raising or when they're trying to build their business higher? But do you ever feel imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think I've really embraced it for a long time, but I think like the core feeling, I can remember a lot of times, feeling like that over, the last decade, in everything that I've done. But I think the reality is, the reason I feel it less now is not because, I'm more successful. It's because I meet really big companies and really successful people all the time that I realize don't have their shit together, right? They have no idea what they're doing just as much as everyone else. And makes you feel a lot better about yourself when you realize that these companies and these people are just running around in circles as well, trying to figure out what to do. And so, that's the reality. And, here we got a great team. Everyone's just here problem solving. No one pretends like to have all the answers. But we're just like here trying to figure them out. And so I kind of think about that less, to be honest. And plus, I'm more transparent with my background. I instead of me pretending that I'm great in lots of ways, I surround myself with people who are great in those areas. So yeah, I feel like it less, but I think it's also just like coming of age thing as well. I think you feel more comfortable in your skin at a certain stage in life than earlier on. I'm not a 20-year-old kid anymore that has much older people reporting into me, and so I think that does help too. But yeah.
In regards to the diversity question, there's a lot of still challenges, especially for females who are looking to capital raise. I have a number of female founders in RCL who are capital raising and have struggled. What sort of things do you see? You have a co-founder, of course, as well, who is Alison. What sort of things do you see in the struggle, and where do you think, or what's the top 10 tips that you could pass on? Maybe 2.
Yeah. Look, I definitely think there's no denying that it's harder for minorities and women to raise money and do lots of things in life, right? And I can't say that from a lot of personal experience being a white man, but the stats just are like so harsh and strong that it's like unequivocal. And so I think, how to go over that. I think there's so much more work that needs to be done, so much more money that needs to flow to females and diverse founders. But I do think a lot is being done. Like over the last 12 months, I've seen like probably a step change in the amount of money going to women, female founders, going to diverse founders. I think there is a big push here. It's a really small amount of money compared to like overall. So I would like to see more done, but I am, I'm optimistic, and I do see that changing. I also, whilst I'm a white man, I still, I'm still an immigrant here in the US. I didn't even have a visa when I first got funding. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have the networks. I didn't go to Stanford. I wasn't brought up with a silver spoon in my mouth. So there was still like, I still had to prove myself as an outsider here. And I think the beautiful thing about Silicon Valley is that it's like really quite open to outsiders. That's a lot of the people running the biggest tech companies in the world are immigrants as well. So I think that it's somewhat of an embracing sector, but at the same time, the stats also, paint a pretty dire picture. But one that is, I think there was an article that Alison, my co-founder, was in the Forbes article last month, I think, that something like 30% of every round over $100 million had a female co-founder. A founder or co-founder, and female-led business, and that's a really good stat, to be honest. I mean, it should be 50%, but I think you'll find that a couple of years ago that would have been like single digits.
And then we've got a question from Alan Wang. Are you thinking of expanding into the bio-authentication down the line?
Yeah, so biometrics is something that's definitely coming into Fast in the not too far away future. There is a very, very large long-term vision of Fast, but I think the first thing that you can expect to see is Fast buttons on more websites, Fast login buttons, Fast checkout buttons on lots and lots of sites. We actually sort of paused Australia as a market recently because the banks were charging every Australian user a fee to purchase using Fast checkout, and but as of, I think today, yesterday or today, we started re-onboarding Australian stores, and you can start to see like lots more Australian retailers adopting Fast checkout over the next week or two. I think we've got something like 20 big retailers coming on board over the next week or two, and there'll be lots more coming. So the first thing you can just expect to see is to be able to use Fast login and Fast checkout in lots more places. And then the sort of short answer to how it will evolve is everywhere that you see a form today, whether it's online or offline, that's likely a place that Fast will live in the future.
Love it, love it. Big audacious goals, but all I can say is all the answers you've given us today shows the testament of your hard work. This is not easy, and you have demonstrated how much work you've put behind this through your answer, and you haven't rose-colored lensed anything, which is great. Do you have any other things that you'd like to share with the audience while you've got them?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the nice words. No, look, I do think that it is an extraordinary time to be an Australian founder. I think that the world is. I think ironically, it took a pandemic to open the world up more than ever before, and so I think that that's a great thing for Australians, and a great thing for like regional Australia, regional Queensland as well, is that again you're at no disadvantage compared to somebody in Brisbane or Sydney now, because the world is so open virtually. So I think it's a great time. It is, like I said, it's hard work. It's meant to be hard work. I just wouldn't be afraid of the fact that it's being hard. Just make sure that you're having a lot of you're just making progress all the time, right? I think like procrastination is the worst possible thing that you can have, and you want to have as little of that as possible. Yeah.
Amazing words. Thank you, Dom.
Sure.
Thank you so much for your time coming back and visiting us virtually. It's been excellent, and have a fabulous night and weekend ahead. I'm sure you'll be still working because your family is still here, right?
Yeah.
In Australia?
They just got home. They've been home for a couple of weeks now. So
excellent. Great to hear.
Yes. Yeah.
Great to hear. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate all of the knowledge and experience you've shared.
Pleasure. Thanks all.